This resolution appoints a UN coordinator to get on with facilitating aid, to report within 20 days. So it's not, and no one should pretend this resolves the situation, but diplomacy has achieved something here, and it is a step forward in the crisis.
In the last few minutes, the UN Security Council has passed a Gaza resolution following days of wrangling, but it stops short of calling for a ceasefire, instead urging the assembled parties to create the conditions for one. The White House ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, addressed delegates immediately after the vote passed.
Today, this council provided a glimmer of hope amongst a sea of unimaginable suffering. Today, this council called for urgent steps to immediately allow safe, unhindered, and expanded humanitarian access, and to create the conditions for sustainable cessation of hostilities.
Well, William, I know the Foreign Office has welcomed this resolution, and indeed it has taken many days of wrangling, but it's a rather puny resolution. And, you know, the US abstaining puts it in the same camp as Russia in that context. I mean, it's a slightly sort of shameful episode for diplomacy, isn't it?
Well, no, I wouldn't think of it that way. The UN Security Council has not been able to agree on anything before on this crisis, and you can see how difficult it is because, as you say, the US and Russia both abstain, but they abstain for different reasons. You know, the US because the resolution doesn't condemn the original Hamas attacks on the 7th of October, and the Russians because they think it lets the Israelis carry on with their military operations. So to avoid a veto by either of those countries, well, then to get the rest of the Security Council together, 13 countries, is actually a diplomatic achievement by the United Arab Emirates, in this case, putting the resolution forward. And most importantly, it's that glimmer of hope that you just heard the US ambassador talk about. That you know, there are people in desperate situation in Gaza and the threat of a massive humanitarian crisis, of famine and everything else. And this resolution appoints a UN coordinator to get on with facilitating aid, to report within 20 days. So it's not, and no one should pretend this resolves the situation, but diplomacy has achieved something here, and it is a step forward in the crisis.
Right, Helena Kennedy, is it a diplomatic triumph, or at least a glimmer of hope, or is it a damp squib?
I suppose it suggests that there's a teetering towards something which is important. I mean, I think that what is becoming very clear, and I hope it is becoming clear to Israel, is that people around the world are horrified by the level of killing that's taking place. The deaths are becoming absolutely, they're shocking and appalling the world. And so it's beginning to have a very negative impact. And I think that they should think twice about that. But I do also think that people should be reminded always about about the Hamas behavior that started this. And I also think that one of the things that would make a big difference was if Hamas is really concerned about its own people, the Palestinians, rather than just Hamas, then they would be returning the hostages. I mean, that they should immediately be thinking about whether they can't take steps to return those people to their families and do it now. And then you will get a much greater willingness to retreat from the bombardment and so on. I'm sure that there's no doubt in my mind that Israel is very keen to take out the leader of the military section of Hamas. They want him. They want his head. And so if they got it tomorrow, that would alleviate a lot. But it's a horrible way in which to be doing business. We've got to be capable of holding two truths in our heads and in our hearts at the same time. One is that what happened on the 7th of October was absolutely atrocity crimes, and that also what is happening now is wholly disproportionate, and that months afterwards we're still seeing this high level of killing. It really, a moment has come where something has to be done about this. And so I am disappointed. I think it's a great pity, but it suggests to me that there's a teetering towards something.
Right.
And I hope it has the impact that we're praying for.
William, when you look at the fact that in Gaza there is now the prospect of famine, a total catastrophe is unfolding there in a humanitarian sense. It does seem rather astonishing and makes a lot of people very angry that there can't be a unified call for a ceasefire.
Well, a ceasefire would have to be, the new phrase of the last couple of weeks is used by our own government, is a sustainable ceasefire. And that is the right thing to call for, because, of course, it's easy to call for a ceasefire. But if Israel just ceased fire, well, what would happen? They would expect that then they wouldn't get any more of the hostages back and that they would be attacked again in the future in the same barbaric way. So that's why it's important to understand a ceasefire has to be really willingly entered into with a lot of conditions attached to it by both sides to make a ceasefire workable. And what we've seen in the last few days is Hamas, Helena just made a very excellent point about the hostages. They just refused to do another deal about hostage release in return for prisoners held by Israel. That was Qatar was attempting to negotiate another such deal in the last few days. So you can see how hard it is to get to a ceasefire. It is an appalling situation.
Kathy,
we've got to have to be resolved.
What we have to recognise is that there are laws of war, and it started with Hamas committing crimes which were breaches of the laws of war. They committed war crimes by what they did. The raping of the women, the burning of homes, the destruction of lives, all of that. Those were war crimes. But we're now seeing war crimes too, I'm afraid. I know that my Israeli friends and many of my Jewish friends don't want to hear me saying that, but I also have Palestinian friends, and they are suffering enormously. And so we have to say that what happens, you can't have a population being starved into submission. You can't have collective punishment. You can't be, the principles of proportionality and distinction, making a distinction between civilians and between hospitals and churches and schools from other things. This level of destruction is really, we wanted after Dresden. I hear cabinet ministers and people saying, but we did similar things during the Second World War. The whole point of the upgrading of the Geneva Conventions and humanitarian law being developed was to say law can't be fought, wars can't be fought like this. Even in war, there must be law.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah. To talk, because a lot of people make that point about Dresden, and as you say, you with your legal hat on, obviously the laws were supposed to have been created to stop that kind of thing happening again.